long
It
interprofessional
is a long
relationship.
story.
Yeah.
So I joined IOER in 2005, lo those many years ago, and as a freshman, and stuck with it ever since, and apparently haven't been able to get rid of me. I don't know, like I don't know how much you've already like heard about IOER, and therefore.
We want to hear everything you have to say.
I think I got involved with IMWR because I came into Gustavus not knowing what I was going to do, but knowing I was not going to be a theater major. That was like my only requirement coming in, because I wanted to do something meaningful with my life. And then I saw IMWR's E Pluribus performance and went, oh, there's a way to do both. And the next day I called my mother and said, yeah, well, I'm going to be a theater major. So I've been involved ever since.
What was kind of the setup of it when you first started, and then how, because I know you are very much in the leadership position by midpoint in your experience, but like, so what changed, because it was a transitional.
Right. It was it the first time we split into two groups, or had that happened?
I think you were part of.
Yeah, that original group. Right? So the group was large, fairly large, my freshman year, and there was also like a really great group of seniors that were leaving, namely one Nawal Maroka, who's a student from South Africa, and who was here this fall, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, which I'm so sad I missed. And I realized really early on, other people knew it already, that like IMWR was a uniquely bastardized form of everything. Like there's nothing else quite like it. It's not really Wall, it's not really improv, it's not really applied theater, it's its own thing. And so there was a group of us who said, well, we want to start taking this to high schools, we want to take this to other colleges, we want to make sure that this like is a thing beyond just Gustavus. So we created a little group called the Tombo Project, and we started workshopping around Minnesota and northern Iowa. And out of that, we realized that when we came back my sophomore year, that like there was too many people in it. There were too many people in the group, and we weren't able to be effective. So we actually created two groups that semester. One of which was like the performance IMWR group, and then the other which was the Tombo workshop group. And we presented it at both at other colleges and other like seminar-y things. And then different members of our group went out and did stuff as they traveled different places internationally and around the US doing workshops and performances in an IMWR mode. Primarily with high school students actually. So it's kind of a totally different gig with high school students because there's a lot more that's like off limits until you're in college, but it was a unique experience, and I think it certainly changed the course of my theater life. But and I think we went back and forth between being two groups and one group, but for much of the rest of my time. But.
Now, as I'm remembering, there was a kind of a feeling that it should be anyone who wanted to participate could participate. Yeah. Can you talk, I mean, did people talk about that as a thing during that time? Because that hasn't always been how it was, and it wasn't like that when it started, right? In the early years, we understand it, there were auditions.
Yeah, there weren't, when I was there was, when we split into two groups, there was a selection process by seniors of the performance, like the performance group, like the E Pluribus group and then the workshop group, because you didn't want the E Pluribus group to become largely all white women, which was like the demographically, the largest set of what we had in IMWR. So you had to be intelligent about spreading out who was in that group, and also for performance skill. Mm-hmm. But the workshop group, anybody was able to be in, and they actually ended up doing more work because at that time IMWR only did E Pluribus 2.0 and building bridges, and so the workshop group was actually doing work in high schools and here on campus. We did a couple. We did something with, there was like a swastika incident that we did a teach-in day with, and several on campus.
Teach-in, yeah, I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because there's been more tendency to create additional shows, but I think that has increased the pressure on production for the group, and therefore even less time, in ensemble building or
Right.
training or.
Yeah. And workshopping was good too, because it was easy to put together, and it taught basic wall technique, not only to other people, but also to, the members of the group.
How did you, talk about, I mean, actually, I don't remember specifically where you all talked, because you kind of went off. I mean, I think the Tambo.
Tambo can be, yeah.
THAMBO, and talk about how you got that name, and
I don't remember.
it's an African word.
Yeah. Well, I think it was over wine at some point, which is maybe why I don't remember, but, well, yeah, Tambo was a word in a South African language, and unfortunately I don't remember which, but, it's a root word that means both, it's the root word for both like thread and for bone, and we liked, which is kind of a funny combination, but we liked this idea of like connectivity and strength, and that was kind of part of the philosophy of what this was. And we were 18, we thought it sounded really badass. So that was what it became. But yeah, we functioned really independently, and we kept functioning until about 3 years ago. 3 or 4 years ago, we were still doing workshops various places.
Because you did a lot of international. Talk about which one, were you?
I was in India in the summer of 2007, and did 2 workshops, one with middle school students that wasn't really a wall, and one with high school students that was very much like an I Am We Are style performance. The funny anecdote about that experience was that we got the show put together. We were performing at Vistar, which maybe some of you have been or at least heard of. It's where the India Social Justice group goes to. And they have like an outdoor theater at Vistar, which is like a mud brick theater and amphitheater. And the day of the performance, and that was where it was going to happen, was like monsoon season started. And so as our theater is washing away, we ended up never performing that workshop, but they did later, and I've got the poster from it. They did somewhere in a rented theater in the city, but that never performed. So I did 2 workshops in Bangalore. Chris Bacon did one in Morocco, where he was with the Peace Corps, and one in South Korea. Lindsay Fox did one in South Korea. No, in India. And then it was other, mostly. I did one in Connecticut, and then others was mostly Minnesota. We did 2 in my barn. My family has it's not a farm, but like used to be a farm at some point in northern Iowa, and so for 2 summers we cleared out the tractor shed and did theater in the tractor shed, which was fun.
It starred Judy Garland.
We did I Am We Are style performance.
Yeah.
You know if you've ever played the Greek exercise, it's a wall game where like people lift other people up, right, and they're moving kind of through the air. It's a beautiful exercise, but it's also vaguely dangerous. And that was the first time we ever attempted that exercise on the concrete floor of the tractor. Nobody died, so.
That's a good thing.
Ever since. I'm sorry, I felt like there was a more relevant question there that I tangentially disappeared from.
No, just, anything more to say about, I mean, I in trying to do some research myself, I read some of your, the Tambo written manifesto.
Right, oh dear.
Well,
I've not read it near that, it's probably embarrassing.
No, it isn't. What do you remember of being your purpose and, I think it was very idealistic, but in a really good way.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that drew me to I Am We Are, and I think draws other people, is that it's like there's no other setting in which you talk about things with the like openness and sincerity that you're able to achieve in like this very isolated, reinforced ensemble that is I Am We Are. And so that was what was important to us, was like recreating that ability, because like how much did we all need that in high school, right? Like, or at some other point in our life, and there was never an opportunity like that. So I think that was what inspired us to do it with limited success, but with a lot of opportunities.
Yeah. other, well, there are other questions about that time that can come up, but what did you talk about then? What happened what do you pursue post-college?
Sure. I moved out to Connecticut after college to be near the gelato shop. And, which is as good a reason as anything. And no, I ran a New Canaan, Connecticut. If you've ever seen the Stepford Wives, it's where both versions of the Stepford Wives are filmed, and it's not fiction. It's very much like that. So I lived in New Canaan for a year and a half, managing a performing arts school out there, which was crazy and so much fun. It was you know, it's the wealthiest zip code in the United States, and the school brings in, it's not like a day school, it's like an after school kind of thing, brings in professional Broadway musicians and performers, and you know, runs then a little performing arts after school program, but with real professionals from New York City. So these kids are amazing because they've been training like since utero to become like triple threat tap dancers, singers, and actors. And so the kids I was working with went on to, I mean, I wasn't working with them, I was there managing the schedule, but the kids that were in the studio were, went on to become, I mean, I've got a list of kids who've gone on to do Broadway work in Mary Poppins and Annie and you know, any number of other things. It's just been cool to follow their careers and wave as they go by. But so we did that, and lots of famous people came in, which was fun too. And then after that, the woman who owned the studio fell in love with a Swiss man and moved to Switzerland. And so I said, see ya. And came back to the Twin Cities and did professional theater or semi-professional theater work up there, primarily stage managing and assistant directing for a couple years. And then then I bought a music box company, which was a terrible idea, and promptly went bankrupt and moved back to Iowa. And if anyone wants music boxes, I've got lots of them. You can talk to me later. And started working at a mental health clinic where I was developing a wall-based theater therapy work, which I'm sure you have to have some kind of certification for that I didn't have, but it was a lot of fun, and I don't think we permanently scarred too many people. And then I began what I'm doing now, which is I run a community theater, a large producing community theater in Northwest Iowa, the Spencer Community Theater, which has we're the largest in Northwest Iowa, which isn't like saying a whole lot, but it's not like, you know, in my tractor barn. Beautiful new building. We do 6 full main stage productions a year. We have a very large children's theater, and then we bring in a number of, you know, performance music and performance things. So that's what I do right now, is manage that facility, and those programs have been a lot of fun.
And you direct some shows, yeah?
Yeah, more than I should. This year I've directed the 39 Steps, which was a blast. Just finished a production of Our Town, which was beautiful, if I do say so. And this summer I did Into the Woods with the teenage production, using Gustavus's cow. So it was a lovely moment.
Yeah, we can.
I have like 1,000 questions now. So first of all, I think my first question is, when you were working in Connecticut, did you ever feel comfortable talking to those kids about like privilege or like those kind of things, like talking about social justice issues with that specific community?
It's really hard to talk about privilege with kids who like go to the, you know, like if you went, I went to the like the, it's not Goodwill, but like the whatever.
Salvation Army.
Salvation Army store, right? Because that's where I got my designer clothing, right? Like that was the level of privilege we were dealing with, sort of in a nutshell. So no, but also because that wasn't really, that's not what I was there to do. But a lot of those kids, they grew up in a town where actually privilege and unprivilege was in some ways more apparent than it is in a middle class like world, because these people literally have servants, right? They literally have, there's help that comes in. And so there's an interesting awareness of what that is. It's obviously from a very particular standpoint, but so no, I guess no, I failed in
No, I mean,
life,
you know,
but,
he wasn't in a teaching, directing, you
Yeah.
Right,
know,
I guess
relationship.
that's why I asked that, because it's like, in that setting, it's like, what can you say?
Yeah.
Because you're trying to make a living and
Right.
not, you know, be ostracized.
it's definitely true that when college idealism meets the real world, that there has to be a rebalancing. I can't, it becomes the Helen Keller thing of like, I'll do something I can do, because there's a lot fewer things that I can do when my livelihood depends on only upsetting so many votes. So yeah, I mean, and that's a difficult position, but such is life.
So Evan was the person who kind of put the Helen Keller quote at the end.
I think so. I'd have to go back and look through the scripts
I think
though.
you were.
I don't know about that. I was at least part of that group.
Until then, well, not, I mean, I don't know, I can't remember what it was at the very first few years, but when words of hate became a thing, then, and it was, I think Trish mentioned sometimes it was in the middle of the show, which didn't work very well, and then it would be at the end of the show, and we had Neo Moroka, you know, who was, kind of a force of nature, you know, spiritual guy who would sing afterward, sing something, what was the name?
Freedom Song. It was like a Bob Marley piece, wasn't it? Yeah.
Afterward, and like everyone would get what the point of that was, right? No hate, Freedom Song, right? And that was at least 3 years of doing that. And then he left, in a couple of other years we had other people sing, but it wasn't as effective as he was. And then there needed to be something not that, because no one was able to really make, people started saying, I remember this, I don't know, song is cheesy there, you know, and I'm saying, but what about, you know, there's a train a-coming or something. No, you know, she's so out of touch with our generation, you know, or something. So then you guys evolved to not just say the quote, but to parse it out and respond to it.
Yeah, and now that you're actually saying that, I think we stole it too. I mean, obviously from Helen Keller, but I think there was a Building Bridges conference.
Oh, that used that quote.
Used it,
Yeah.
and then we were like, oh, that's brilliant, and then we added it to the end of the
They used it.
Burbage show.
Just as a
thing, and then
thing.
we went on, yeah.
So
So just kind of diving in deep here.
Okay.
All right. I know it might be tough to like remember specifics.
Yeah.
We are. But how did you deal with the balance between? Was it always a place that you could feel 100% safe, being sincere about everything you felt about what was happening in the group, and if not, you didn't feel like it was a position where you could say what was really on your mind to the group? How did you deal with that? How did the group adjust to that?
I mean, as a human being, I was socially oblivious enough to never not feel safe. Like, you know, but I think it's a struggle we have. I'm sure the group still has. I remember several times where one of the process things that was really important to us was making sure that check-in and check-out served its function. When I joined the group, check-in was like a 45-minute ordeal where we had, you know, like, and then for breakfast I had granola, and then,
Yes,
you know,
yes.
and it just goes, and everybody's just dying. And I know Amy came in a couple times with like the big guns to say, thou shalt not, and then we got pretty good at policing it. Because check-in and check-out serve such an important bookend function in regulating the group dynamics. And if they're not working properly, then tension and everybody's anxiety and everybody's sniping, you know, leaks out the ends. Otherwise, I think we also felt strongly about making sure that we took time during the year to do group building and workshop exercises. Like, we always did a retreat in January. We pretty regularly did at least like 1 or 2 weeks a semester where we said, no work is getting done here. We're going to do either a specific like group building thing, or we're going to do up a wall training thing. And actually that's really helpful because it brings everybody back to a common place. It doesn't necessarily address like, you know, the social dynamics that
Right.
sometimes causes other problems, but it's a good building block for that. I'm sorry I don't have a more specific answer,
No,
because it sometimes it depends on the unique individuals,
Right.
you know.
So you had mentioned when you were saying the performance group only did 3 shows a year, and you said E pluribus, and then 2.0. Well, we don't do 2.0 anymore.
You don't do 2.0 anymore?
I haven't done, because there's all this other stuff that,
Yeah.
but do you all know what it was?
No.
Carla and Ethan would always be like 2.0, and then we were like,
2.0
no.
is just an adjustment of the E pluribus show
For everybody.
for everybody, so it's the same
So,
show.
yeah,
We didn't
Music community. Community was not the same
No.
as E pluribus.
No, using all the,
It was,
using 90% of the same material, taking out things that were very specifically first-year student oriented. When you first come to Gustavus, because that would not be relevant, but then, and then adding some pieces and adding.
Adding freshmen in.
Freshmen in.
It was a training exercise in part for first-year students who joined the group. And also, I mean, it had a bad rap sometimes among the group, because there was like E pluribus, where you slaved for a week, like spending all your time perfecting it. And then like 2 months on, you're like, well, time to do 2.0, grab the scripts, here we go. You know, it's just sometimes the like quality of that production was a little uneven, but it had a useful
Yeah.
function. We usually did it in the alumni hall on really squeaky risers,
Horrible.
horrible risers.
We still have those risers.
Yes.
What's your, I wouldn't say like favorite social justice issue, or at least something that you're most passionate about as far as like social justice and stuff?
I don't know, I guess I've never thought of it in those terms. I mean, GLBT issues are important to me personally, so then like that's become a focus of my work there, but otherwise, you know, in a lot of ways I come from the same world that the kids in New Canaan come from, minus the servants. So there's a limited number of social justice issues I feel qualified having a position on or speaking authoritatively on, except, you know, I can do the goal exercises.
And I remember from you as like a really commitment to the global justice
Mhm.
question, you know?
Yeah, I mean, again, more out of passion than out of knowledge, but, yeah, I mean, IMER as a whole in that period did a lot of skits that were less about, I mean, not that we didn't do all of the same, you know, rape and like really personal, interpersonal problems. But we did a number of skits that were, and a number of like building bridges that were very, very large social issues. And so I think there was an interesting mix of those things in the group.
Mhm.
It was a year in the group.
What inspired buying a music box?
Oh, stupidity, just sheer stupidity. No, it's, no, honest to God, I've got hundreds of music boxes in my basement, so please, if you're ever through Northwest Iowa, let me know. No, I mean, it was always the cool thought to be a small business owner, right? And it turns out there's like actual skills involved with that as a theater major from Gustavus, I had many skill sets, but like bookkeeping wasn't necessarily one of them. And that's a skill I've had to learn the hard way. Yeah, I think of it as my MBA, you know, like without a certificate.
I guess I'm wondering why music boxes. Like, was there like a?
Oh, it's fun, isn't it? Like if you were ever, like who wants to sell vacuum cleaners, wouldn't you rather sell music boxes?
But I mean, I remember you really struggling over the decision of whether or not you were going to do
Yeah.
it. And then somehow there was an opportunity that had presented itself, but I don't know how
Yeah.
it
Well, I
happened.
worked for an online retail, very small online retail company in the Twin Cities, and we started out like me and this other guy in his living room, and then slowly grew into an office where we had 7 staff members, yada yada yada. And then this lady from Chicago offered to sell us. She wanted to retire, and she had this, website that somebody had built for her in 1992, and was selling music boxes off of it. And we said, my business partner said, "No, we don't really want to do this." And I was like, "I'll do this." Only, but
I'm our spirit.
yeah. So yeah, I don't know. It's just the idea of owning my own of business, and it's just cool and different, and I don't know.
Funds your other activities
Yeah.
somehow.
Yeah, I ended up doing none of those things. But
So how many music boxes are in your?
Oh, you guys.
Hundreds, I mean hundreds, just so much basement. That's why I rent a house instead of an apartment, because I need somewhere to put the damn music boxes.
So, for you personally, kind of for members of the IMUI that you were in, what were your guys' reasons for being an IMUI? Because I know each person is extremely different for why they're there in the first place. And not you being specific.
I didn't drink enough alcohol for these kind of questions.
Well, sorry.
Or coffee or something. No, that's great.
Well, you already talked about now I can do theater that's meaningful.
Right, I mean, I think that was a big part of it. All of us thrive on the sense of community, you know, that is artificial but very powerful in that IMWR space. Artificial in the sense that it's like, you know, constructed intentionally to become that. Yeah, I don't know. I think my IMWR time spanned like so many kind of bizarre transitions. Being the first time we had two groups, and or worked with the Tombo project, and that there were lots of, you know, there were many different IMWRs, you know, and they existed for different reasons in different semesters and with different people.
Yeah, and there was that, you know, you said Lindsay, Chris, you and.
Nawo and Andrew Howard, oddly enough. That was the first group, yeah, the first Tombo group.
You know, you had your own like vision. I mean, there was this, I don't know.
Yeah, we dreamed it up in the
core group that really was gonna do international social justice theater for real, forever, around the world.
Yeah. It came to being in the laundry room of International Center. That's where we did it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we actually literally formed a nonprofit. It was registered in Iowa, and we raised exactly $12, and then we just did it for you. It's great on a resume, by the way. Form your own nonprofit. It costs like $50, and then run it for the next 5 years while you're in college. And then when you graduate, you've got 5 years of nonprofit leadership experience on your resume. It's a good gig. But I mean, we did a lot of work with it in those 5 years, and then it petered out when we were all other places and in our lives. But it served its purpose in that time.
Was that like a function of just sort of hitting with finding those other core people that wanted to do this? I just remember that group as a force of nature. That
there was strong leadership, you know, with Lindsay Fox, Nailo, Chris Bacon, Brian Evans. You know, there was Rhea Michela being part of that group. Yeah. You know Brian Evans.
Oh, yeah. He came and ran a class.
Yeah. I used to work at children's theater in Iowa, and through high school and college, and in the summers. And one summer, Chris Bacon and Lindsay Fox and I all worked there. And in the green room, there was at a time where Brian Evans was on like the Gustavus Theater pamphlet. And we got like 50 of them and plastered the green room mirror with Brian Evans' photo. A little shrine to Brian Evans in the green room of the children's theater.
He deserves every shrine he gets.
He does.
very photogenic.
Yeah. An unrelated anecdote, do you know the time about that Brian Evans threw a dancer into the ceiling?
No.
What?
It's worth telling for
I
30
don't know if I
seconds.
remember that.
So Kresge, right, has like a ceiling this high, and there was do they still do, what was like this?
Shared space?
Shared space, right, so it was a shared space performance. I was running the light board, and Brian came to Gustavus as like a pre-med student and football player, right? And then exits as one of the Twin Cities leading dance students.
Yeah.
So there was this, I don't think it was Noemi Lopez, I think it was somebody else in that era, very small petite woman, and he had this throw, and he got excited, opening night of Shared Space, and he launched her up there, and she ricocheted off the ceiling and came back down. It was just dreadful. But,
Oh, God.
well worth it.
Oh, my
Well,
God.
just stunned silence. That was fine. My goal in life is to be powerful enough to like throw a dancer into the ceiling.
Oh.
That's like the quintessential Brian
He
Evans.
did
story.
not, he failed to mention that.
Yeah, I'm sure he did.
I knew there was something off about him. I don't know.
What are some of your favorite, scenes from shows that you can recall? I know I'm remembering one that you're in.
The masturbation.
Yes,
That's what
how
we
did
were
you know?
talking
That's what I
about,
was
yeah.
thinking about.
Do they still do that skit?
No,
Well, we try and fit in a masturbation skit
Oh.
in Pluribus.
Is it like a specific?
it's the one they created, and I've never seen other people do it as a fact.
Oh. There's one where like the two women walk across the stage, and they're gonna have a conversation where one, you know, they're roommates. One woman asks the other woman not to masturbate while she's with them both in the room, right? Which is a good conversation to have.
But she's very
But
upset.
is very upset about it, and it's like a 10-minute conversation, like
Because it makes
going around all of this, you know, and then two guys walk across, and who are roommates, and the one guy goes, "Hey, dude, could you not jack off while I'm in the room?" "Oh, yeah," and he's like eating an apple, and then they go across. It's a dumb skit, but it's just a
It's
funny
gonna
way.
take 10 minutes and the guy's
Yeah,
like one
yeah,
line.
It's a dumb skit. The ones that like have meant the most to me, well, actually, a funny one is my first year at Gustavus was the second year of Facebook, right? Like, because I'm that old. So we did a Facebook skit because it was new and it was like exciting and cool. It was still thefacebook.com at that time, and so that was, I've got a video of that of Michael J. Seeloff doing, somebody going around the stage poking everybody. Does that even still exist on Facebook? You still poke people?
No.
For some reason.
For some reason, yeah. And I have 5,000 friends. I have 12,982 friends. I have 6 friends. I have, and then like joining groups based on, I love ice cream. No, the ones that mean the most to me, there was a religion skit that, you had written part of that was, do they still do that?
No,
We
I
never found a good solution to another version of that skit. Just addressing multiple religions where a different character walked in, like from a Christian perspective, from a Jewish perspective, from a Muslim perspective, from an atheist perspective, and sometimes there were various other things depending on what we had in the group. They gave like a brief humorous or touching monologue, and then at the end there was a prayer that happened in like the native traditions of each of those religions. And I played the Jewish character, which was a monologue that Amy had written, and I played it like 4 times in a row, and everybody on campus thought I was Jewish for the rest of my time at Gustavus, which was great. So it was just like one of those funny, just one of those funny like outcomes of doing the show. We did I wrote a skit about disability that used it was terribly maudlin, but it used a poem about daffodils. I think it's still in the collection somewhere. It was as of a couple of years ago. About dandelions. A dandelion is a flower, not a weed. It was a set of poems written by a kid who died very young from multiple sclerosis or something, but he wrote all this poetry. That was a cool piece. Words of Hate, which I still sometimes do privately in my office when I'm happy.
I am one.
Let's do it, I am one.
I remember really vividly the one, and people did it after you, but you were the originator of like being alone in your dorm room and hoping someone would visit.
Yeah. God, we were so angsty. Yeah, we did one. I don't think I wrote it. I think I just performed it. I don't remember for sure. Just like about, I wish somebody would come visit me. I'm so, it's hard for me to get outside the dorm room. Actually, one connected to that I remember was Megan Bren did one about anxiety. There were like 2 characters, and I don't remember what the other character in the middle was, but she did this whole monologue, like a 3-minute monologue, while she circled the stage, getting smaller and smaller and smaller until she like collapsed against the woman in the middle. And it was just about like stress and anxiety. That was a really cool one.
Were there any skits that, oh, sorry.
So, it might actually be the exact same question that you're just about to ask. Is there a skit that you wrote, or you knew or somebody wrote, that did not make it into a show that you wish did?
Oh, that I wish it did?
Yes.
Oh, God, probably, but I've long forgotten.
really?
The only skit, I mean, the skit that immediately comes, it was fairly early on. We had a couple people involved who wrote an abortion skit, and that was, and from the perspective of a pro-life message, and it was a really like, I remember those nights were like, oh God, what do we do? How does this fit in? Where does it work? What, do we cut it? Do we keep it? Do we add another element? Because We Are comes at theater from the point of posing the question rather than presenting the answer, that in particular is a very divisive issue to try and address. And I remember that skit was never performed, and group members left because of that. But we never did find a good way to. Left the group, yeah, because we didn't perform the skit. That was tough.
Well, I'm remembering this, but this is good, it's sort of like, oh, I remember well.
I remember when.
When, way back when.
Someday you'll be all of 28 and, reminiscing about it.
But no, what I remember about that, if I'm remembering the same one, is that there was some theme going on about those who had been silenced, or those whose voices were not heard. And so this skit was, the voices of the unborn, and the unborn in their voices wanted to say, I'm a person, I have a voice. And, at a certain point I just said, that's not something We Are is going to say like that.
That's right. It was in the same set of shows as the disability skit, as the war skit, where we talked about the number of dead in each war. And we carried bodies on stage. Yeah, there was a whole show themed around that. I don't remember what else was in it, but that was cool.
Yeah.
So we have a process now, like how we determine what piece is going in which. Could you tell us what your process was?
Well, what's your process now?
Okay, well, so we all write over the course of maybe 2 weeks prior to the show, probably maybe longer than that. Then once we get all the pieces, we go through, we read them. All of us sit around here or down in the box and edit and stuff like that. And then we put everything that's polished into a polish folder. And then when all that's done, we all come into the room, we pick what pieces we're going to use, cut them, then set list, and then we cast. Right? Is that the right order?
That's about right.
Yeah.
That's way more organized than we were. That's
Well,
great.
Google Drive helps.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, back when we just had paper and pencil back in my day.
Road of horses, it's not a
We were
car.
just floppy disks, we had to drive. Well, it was always different for E Pluribus than it was a little bit for the rest, because we had spent more time for other shows. We always had a mix. There were a number of very good writers in our group, and sometimes writing is an activity best done in solitariness. Solitude, that's the form I'm looking for. So we often had a group of people who we would say, okay, we need a skit on X. Who wants to claim it? I'll claim it, go write it, then we'll bring it in and workshop it. We had a number of, in places where we didn't have that, we often started with like an image theater piece, and then built like a little improv based on that, and then said, okay, what's good here, what sucks, let's rewrite it, and then started creating a piece out of that. We definitely always had a night at the end where we always had too much material and not enough show time, and then you have to make the list, and that always led to tears and throwing things, but just needed to happen. I'm sure this is still the case with We Are. One of the things we always emphasized was that as soon as you bring something to the group, it's no longer yours. It becomes the property of the group, whatever that is. So that philosophy is really helpful. I still use that philosophy, like working with community theater people, because it's so hard for them to wrap their mind around. But it's really important for a good group function. Otherwise, there's no way to address material without addressing a person.
I learned that a lot easier to preach that than to practice.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
So similar to the question Sam had, is, are there any pieces that made it into a show that retrospectively you thought to yourself, oh shit, that was bad, we shouldn't have done that?
Or some, not
Yeah.
necessarily that he created.
I mean, I think there were always things where like, oh, well, that didn't go quite the way we hoped. Well, once where I was talking about with Amy, just before we came in here, in that transition period between Maywool singing the ending and the Helen Keller, there was like a couple years where somebody else sang either that song or another song with moderate degrees of effectiveness. And then there was a 2.0 of some, or a Building Bridges or something, it was in Alumni, where we had no ending. And we knew that like the singing thing was done, but the Helen Keller thing didn't exist yet. And the night before the show, we still didn't have an ending. We didn't know what the hell we were going to do. And so Chris Bacon and Brian Evans and somebody else and I, it couldn't have been Lindsay now that I think about it, because she would have been graduated by then. So it was another, maybe Rhea or somebody else. Went to Perkins in North Mankato after we ended at midnight and stayed there till 4 in the morning drinking coffee and milkshakes. Writing this ending, and it was the ending that eventually transitioned into becoming Helen Keller, but was the idea of, okay, you know, this is, we've done our bit, now it's your turn to do your bit. What do you take from this? What do you do? How do you act on this outside of this performance? And we did Words of Hate, gave this little monologue in the dark. And while that was happening, the cast all exited out of dark side exits of Alumni, so that when the lights came up, there was just nobody there. Where they were expecting the song and like the happy ending and the waving of the flags, there was just emptiness. And so we were terribly proud of that ending. I don't think it was actually very effective in performance, but it was a really cool transitional element between, you know, that old tradition and the new tradition.
So for posterity, can we put down that the Helen Keller monologue was written at 4 a.m. at Perkins on coffee?
No, that one was written, that was the next year. But
The following year.
yeah, I'm sure we stole it from Building Bridges, but I don't remember what exactly.
No, it was like, that didn't work.
Yeah, we better come up with a new one. Yeah.
It was surprising. Oh, a question from one of the sides.
You mentioned working with like Boal techniques and therapy.
Yeah.
Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I didn't do it very well. So I was working in an outpatient mental health clinic that primarily worked with young people, like teenage adolescents with borderline personality disorder, which is, for those of you who are not intimately familiar with borderline personality disorder, there's a number of ways of describing it, but one of the key elements of it is that it usually involves a trauma history. There's either abuse of a single very traumatic instance, like a rape or a sexual assault, or there's a long history of abuse, like through childhood. And that has a number of really, really damaging both psychological and physical and psychophysical effects as you get older. So that was the population we were primarily working with. We used, not really Boal as such, although we did do some image theater, but because image theater was very difficult because trust is non-existent and physical touch is terrifying, right? So like there's a limit to what you can do with theater where like the body is the basic unit of what you're doing. So a lot of what we did was really about basic confidence in presenting. We played lots of games. We like embryo, shark. You still do this warm up, right? This was the best warm up ever. We played really basic improv games. Also super interesting in terms of how that trauma history affects the ability to imagine and the ability to create. Boal obviously has a very Rainbow of Desire set of techniques designed for that. I was not there long enough to get to a point where that was possible. But it was kind of amazing to see some of these young people who were almost nonverbal in every other context, to be able to be interactive in this context because it was a game. And then there were rules and there was structure and I knew how it was going to end. And then it was safe in some way. So that was a cool experience.
So was that done in a group setting then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, usually 5 to 10 people.
And how long were you there? Like over what period of time did you actually have to work with?
I was only there for about 9 months before I took the position at the community theater. But we met twice a week usually for an hour and a half, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm getting into therapy.
Sure.
So I'm wondering, like, because, like, I don't know, there are, like, a lot of really cool aspects about this stuff that you can implement, but like you said, it takes time. You have to develop that level of trust.
I went in with no skill set in theater therapy, and there's a whole realm of literature and training and practice available for people interested in doing that, which is very effective, and probably should have been required of whoever was doing the job I was doing. But even with my sort of stumbling effort, it was amazing to see the changes that were happening on a very small scale. I have no doubt in the efficacy of that treatment. You know, the effect. Some people say, "Oh, art therapy," you know, and that's easy to think that, but it really is. There's an impact there that's kind of amazing.
Do you have any regrets about what you've done since school, other than the music boxes?
We don't have enough time for that. Like occupationally, like theater-wise, like
Both.
Do you have a couch?
Yeah.
Or
Student right out of undergrad, very rarely. And for a couple of years, I thought that's what I want to do. And then I met a lot of people living that life and went, oh hell no, I never want to live that life. You know, these people who have no home, they're traveling all the time, they're they're one job to the next, or they're working 8 productions at one time. And so I started thinking, well, what's the happy medium? And I really stumbled into this position at the community theater, partly because it was a theater I was familiar with. I'd grown up in that children's theater program. I went into it, even though I was familiar with it, thinking that community theater was kind of a place for like would-be has-been actors, you know, or like noises off, kind of like crazy people who really would benefit more from analysis than theater. And while there is an element of truth to all of that, community theater is actually a very different animal, and in many ways informed by my IMWR experience, because it's not about people who like didn't make it in the professional theater. It's about people who never intended to go into the professional theater, but want to work with their friends and their neighbors, making something magical in their own communities, and something to be proud of. Community theater is a really unique beast. There's nothing else quite like it. Because it's intergenerational, kind of by definition. I work with kids from 3 to 98. It is over a long period of time, right, like 3 months in a musical, so it involves a lot of hands-on work with people. It is non-competitive, unlike a sports world, you know, within limits. And it's creative, and it's skill building, particularly often in an area where people don't have that built-in skill set. It's really changed my thinking on like what matters in the arts, and community theater, much like IMWR, is process-oriented, not product-oriented. We have to have good product, otherwise like nobody will buy tickets and they can't pay me. But at the end of the day, that's not what it's about. Our children's theater work is a lot of what I do, and I'm really proud of that. And it's been so cool to see kids who have no home someplace else, or don't fit in someplace else, or come from shitty families someplace else, have a safe space at the theater. If the production sucks, that was still worth it, you know? And that's what IMWR was for a lot of us. You know, it was the only safe space we had. And if the production sucked, well, you know, only Amy was upset about it. So it was still worthwhile.
I don't think it ever sucked. I think you kicked your butt before that happened.
Okay, you were talking about building bridges one time.
Yeah.
Like, what is the team like
during your time like about the Brilliant Bridge, and what can you tell us about the message and everything?
Let's see. I remember the hardest one we did was on, there was like a nuclear disarmament year. Yeah, they're like, how do we do? That one I remember the most difficult. I think it was a great conference, but we had a very hard time interfacing. I can't remember. It's so hard now because I've come back and seen several of them, and I can't remember which ones I've just seen and which ones were like ours.
I should try to get a list.
Yeah. I remember that one. Do they still happen in the chapel?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a bloody hard space to perform in. Nobody can understand anything you're saying. Yeah, isn't it terrible? Yeah, building bridges is always a challenge. Partly, and I'm sure it's still the case, partly because you didn't have, like with E Pluribus or with any other show, it's like, okay, what do we want to talk about? Now let's create that. Where with building bridges, like, okay, we have to talk about X. Who has this experience, and where can we tie this in? And sometimes the stretch was further than it probably should have been, but yeah, I wish I remembered more about which building bridges shows we did to be able to.
More research oriented in general too.
Yeah.
We'd have to do research.
Do
on
research
nuclear
on disarmament. I mean, I don't remember anything we did for that show.
I don't either.
We certainly didn't end with words of hate in the chapel, would have been a bad idea. I can't remember. I think the one with the Freedom Writers woman. I can't remember if that was right the year after me or that was my senior year. What was that?
The different freedom riders came in?
Yeah. What I forget what that woman's name is.
Yeah.
I don't know, I think this, I mean,
That was a cool conference.
I know the list of all the speakers from 20 years. That's
Yeah.
You know, I bet Leah has it.
I think Gabe has it.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll track that down.
Cause he did the historical thing for the 20th
That's
anniversary.
right.
So he has all of the information that you could possibly ever want. So,
Because I was always part of it.
From year 2.
yeah,
Too.
almost.
How much has, like, I directed the production of E Pluribus that resulted in, like, the censorship, going on. How has that changed for E
So
Pluribus?
it's your
It's my fault, totally. That was the year after I graduated. How does that affect the group now?
Okay. Oh my God. Yeah, I've been in Pluribus since, my sophomore year, so like the past 3 years, and, oh my God, wow, how did this start? It was like, Virgil, you worked with Virgil, so Virgil was still around, and he had just gotten like this new dean's position.
Right.
And then we were told through Virgil by someone else, Jonas, that we weren't allowed to talk about rape and sexual assault. And so this year it was me and Julia Tyndall and Carla and Rush and Dan Burnett and all of it and Alex Christensen. And so it's like with all of those like minds together, they were like, we're gonna fight this.
Yeah.
So E Pluribus Week was like, we met with Jonas twice. And each meeting lasted way longer than it needed to be because we needed to be working on the show, we were like, we need to talk about this topic, and she told us very passive aggressively that we weren't going to be able to, but she didn't actually say that we weren't allowed to. She said that she would advise us not to, and so that whole thing happened, and then like night before we were gonna like try and sneak a piece in or whatever. And then Virgil gets a text and he's like, it'd probably be a good idea if you made sure that they weren't gonna be doing this.
Yeah.
And so it was just like, she kind of like, and he was like in this vice, and so we didn't talk about it that year. So like faculty and stuff noticed that the topic wasn't in the show, and they were asking for it. And so then the next year, we were like, well, let's try this again. Let's give this another shot. And no, it didn't work. We, it had like been assumed that we weren't gonna talk about it or whatever, but she didn't like say it again until very soon before the show. And so we ended up having to like cut another piece out, and we were just censored again, and it was stupid, and we were all really upset. And then this year, we like really fought back. And we had Dean Paula come in, and we presented a couple of pieces to her, we presented something to her. And she like worked through it with us and was like, okay, here are some problems that I see, maybe fix this, and I'm gonna get her to come here. So Jonas brought herself and a couple of her other choice faculty members that
Jonas
she
Rose.
decided to bring because we're being filmed. I'm being careful with my words.
Oh, sorry. This will only be for our own.
Oh, rock on. Okay, yeah, so she brought her minions with, and, she sat and watched what we had to present, and then we made her come down to the stage and sit in a circle with us, and she listened to all of us talk. And we tried to articulate ourselves very well, and get across the point that this is something that we need to talk about. And it's not something that you can just cover in Can I Kiss You, which is what she was assuming was covered just fine. And then one of our cast members was like, actually, after Can I Kiss You, I experienced sexual harassment, so thank you. And so that was we worked through it, and we created this piece, and we spent so many hours working through this. And finally, the next day or 2 days later, she came in, and we showed her what we had, and she was like, yeah, okay, you can talk about this in that way that you just formed. And so it was like,
You can do that
you can do that scene, that one scene, but we could talk about it. And so then she left, and all of us, I started crying, and 3 other people were crying, and it was just we finally broke through the censorship. And so I think that personally, I believe that it's still very much a fragile state. From what we have, we'll have to be easing into talking about it more, openly. But it's definitely made some ground.
That's so interesting to me that that's the topic that got censored,
Yeah.
because that's not the piece that caused the controversy.
Well, here, there's two tributaries to this river of censorship.
Yeah.
Actually, which I think,
It's the piece that happened, but then it's also.
but there's two
yeah.
things, because one was,
'Cause
and
it
were
was-
you responsible for both of them? I don't know, if this is the same year.
Well, the LGBT Dr. Seuss letters thing was the year that it was filmed and it went out to the alumni.
Oh.
That was where that process started, wasn't
Right.
it?
There's two different sensory impulses, and one was the surreptitious videotaping, right, of the performance that was then
Taken out of context.
taken completely out of context and sent out to alumni. And they sent, for those of you who don't know, we had actually the scene very similar to the religion scene that you were talking about. This is the one you're remembering.
Yeah.
With, I'm a Jew, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Christian, I'm an atheist, but they cut only out just the atheist. And so they sent that out, and then they sent something where, it was Coco actually, being, as a gay woman, being attacked. Do you remember?
Yeah, I don't remember that specific skit, but she would have been in that group.
She's like,
Yeah.
I'm just like everybody else, I'm a human being, and people were coming at her. And I think another thing from a gay male perspective.
Well, it was it was a bad skit. In fairness, they picked the right skit that was just dumb, but it was a Dr. Seuss style
A is
about
for asexual.
yeah,
B
trying
is
to
for
introduce
bisexual.
all the terminology that goes around sexuality at the college level,
Yes,
and it was a funny, stupid, Dr. Seuss rhyming thing.
although we have a great Dr. Seuss.
We do.
Yeah.
But, so that was done very deliberately by someone who had been in training camps for, conservative activists, actually. Who had set out to do this, sent these clips around to our alumni. Feedback was
Lost backers,
huge back to to the administration, they got very nervous, and there was this whole thing about, we have to see a preview before you go on,
Right.
and blah, 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 blah. So that's one set of censorship. There was a different set of censorship.
Okay.
Can I, let me finish?
Can I have a question about the
Yeah.
first one really quick?
Yeah,
What happened to that student that filmed it?
he
He was an
had
alumni by that
already
point, yeah, he was invited.
graduated,
Yeah.
so there wasn't anything they could do to him in that way. I mean, actually, he tried to come the following year, and we caught him and asked him to leave. So he really did try to do it again the following year, and, Virgil, I remember Virgil and I were like,
Scouring the
scanning
lobby.
the audience, and like, would you please leave, this is only for first year students.
Oh, he recorded a performance. I thought you like
Yeah.
went in to
No.
like do some like alumni like scouting,
No.
and he accidentally sent in a terrible film. He was
No.
like trying to.
Yeah.
He was
Yeah.
deliberately doing, he came in, prepared, and the one he did, and he surreptitiously videotaped the whole show and then cut out pieces that were, you know, especially out of context were offensive, but out of context, if you say, he said, this is what your students are being forced to attend, that he sent out to all of the alumni. This atheist, thing, they're being forced to watch. This lesbian thing, they're being forced to watch. This is what they're being forced and required to watch. What do you think, alumni? And then they got some crap back.
What did you do to him, man?
Wow.
I could have found him, I know, but the second time when he came again, we found him, and Virgil and I were both looking with Virgil goes over to him, we'd like you to leave now, I'm just here.
And you don't mess with Virgil, like, with the arms crossed, like.
I met Virgil for the first time on Saturday night.
Oh, I love him.
But the second
The
censorship.
other censorship that kind of would get, and I don't know what year, it was the year of Caitlin's,
recording.
rape story.
Well, that was my year too.
That was your
yeah.
year?
Both
You
of those
are-
for me, yeah.
Relevant.
Gosh, so many.
She did one based on her own personal experience of, being sexually assaulted, and then, campus police did not treat her very well. And then, she used, which we thought was very dramatic and theatrically vivid,
Yeah.
the voicemail from her father on her
That's
phone.
right, yeah.
So it was the literal, actual voicemail her father left on her phone after he learned that she had been raped. And, Caitlin, I love you, you're beautiful, I'm thinking about you,
That was a good
just
piece.
like, it was a good piece, it was good theater, it was like,
Yeah.
not the thing to do the year that we also had somebody video,
Right,
surreptitiously
I know.
videotape. It was like, you heard that and your heart just clenched, because it was like a horrible, horrible experience from her that she had, and then there's this like voice of her dad trying to deal and support her as best he could, and it was wasn't acting, it was like phenomenologically real, right? And so this censorship movement happened, and it dovetailed with the fact that Joe Ness was newly the dean, and when she came in, her professed specialty and primary goal was to prevent sexual assault and to make sure it didn't happen, particularly during orientation week. So she felt that the programming had to be the very first night, because things happened that night. And then she felt that because she was being so strong with it, people would feel hammered and over preached to, or I don't know what, by having anything in our show that addressed sexual assault. But the programming she brought in was, Can I Kiss You, which is all about like consent.
It's.
Could you say that with more derision one more time?
And had nothing, I mean, the subject of sexual assault is so vast.
It's
And-
sexual assault is not mentioned hardly at all
Yeah.
in that. It's mentioned for maybe 30 seconds, where he says, if one of your friends happens to this, and you need to tell them, I'm there for you.
Is
We
this
could
where
ask-
you get the
You
t-shirt?
could ask
Yeah.
the freshman in
Yeah.
the room what happened this year. You guys get to share. First years in the room.
Was it effective at all, do you think?
I don't really remember it.
You guys remember Reed Purvis?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, that I do remember very well.
Yeah.
We had to fight so hard for that one skit.
I believe it. Well, like, I mean, he just got up there and, like, there was some really silly, like, oh, when I asked my wife if I could kiss her for the first time, she was taken aback, but now we're married, or something,
Yeah.
something like that. And then it just, and then there was like a quiz or like something at the end, and then we were done, and we were forced to watch it.
I really don't remember the Can I Kiss You, but I mean, according to me, he did kind of talk a lot of, I mean, besides
Didn't he say
consent.
his sister was raped?
Exactly.
He said something like
It
that.
was that one, right?
Yeah.
Because, yeah, there was a lot about rape and, not rape culture, but just like rape in general and things that happen, sexual assault, and he like tried to get us to buy books and stuff that had to do with all that, and like
So
people's,
essentially, it's very after-school special
yeah.
and not, and it's
Commercialist.
dealt with very lightly and surface level. And we were able to finally convince Jonas to let us talk about something in a more honest and like perspective broadening way. And it's been a battle, but
And it is a continuing fight.
it is a continuing fight because this semester, we're gonna keep her to her word. She said, I'd love to continue this conversation with you later on in the year. We're gonna hold her to it by like making a meeting here this semester. So that's gonna happen and it's gonna be great. And if it isn't, then we'll just raise hell again and it'll be fine.
We got bracelets that
Well-
said ask first.
Yeah.
Especially after the rape culture building bridges, I think if we bring up too much, I think
Inappropriate
Yeah.
talking about
it's
them.
gonna be good.
Do you remember, Amy, I was just remembering,
Focused on what are the first years bringing with them to campus, like what secrets do they have, what burdens are they bringing, what idea that they're the only one who ever has done X or has, you know, what shame are they bringing? And you know, we had several open, and the first one was inspired by what the book reading in common was, which was the things they carried, which is a Vietnam, you know, memoir more or less, right? And it talked about how the backpacks that soldiers all had to carry through Vietnam, which were like 60-pound things that had, and he listed everything that these guys had to carry with them all the time. But it was also obviously a metaphor. And so, you know, to say, I've been sexually abused by someone in my family, you know, to name that, say, from the stage, my secret is, you know, I'm a virgin, you know, my secret is, I'm terrified to be here, my secret is, you know, I cut myself, whatever, from the most sort of frightening to the most just sort of,
I pee in the shower,
I pee in the
yeah,
shower.
silly things.
To, exactly, to say, you're not the only one, there are people who understand you, you know.
You are welcome
You
here.
are welcome here. And that, I mean, I think the show always says that, but I think it's been really powerful when it's even more
Yeah.
explicit in a way.
And particularly because for a lot of those first years, that may be the first time in their life that anyone has ever named, like owned the identity that they own as a victim of rape, as a, you know, as somebody who suffers from depression, as a gay kid, as a whatever, and been able to say, and just be honest about it, right? Like, they've gone through their entire lives, like, keeping the box secret, and then that moment is very powerful.
We did it one time with people brought a box.
Yeah.
I'm African American and I'm terrified I'm not gonna find anyone to talk to here with,
Yeah.
you know, one, you know, so things about, yeah, just naming any fear that they're bringing with them or identity, you know.
I think it's, there's another aspect to it. I know specifically for me, being from the South and this being like a completely just different thing. Like
That
you were
was the
saying,
best way to put it, probably.
you were saying that everyone has a box that they don't
Yeah.
know if anyone else shared. Like I had a box that I didn't know what was in the box. There was like this sense of like that I had been so like pushed to the side of like knowing other things that other people go through that I didn't know existed. Not that I didn't know that there were other people who had the same dispositions as I did, but that I didn't know that there were other dispositions. And like you said, keeping those things silent, whether it be sexual violence, religion, gender, sexual identity, things like that. I just don't see why or how you could validate your inclusiveness and not include everything that needs to be included, you know?
The piece we finally got in said, you know, I will not stay silent, right? Have not.
Yes, I have a question, because I'm so interested in like this, I am mental stuff. So you were talking about like when you like joined the island, when you guys have a group and you guys do traveling and stuff. Like I have this question like have you come across like any difficulties talking to like people like that have like different cultures or share different cultures perspectives as yours?
Well, I was largely working with like Midwestern white kids in my barn, right? So in that sense, no, because there we were always working with cultures we understood, even though they were coming from a place in their lives and from a community where like this was probably the first time they were talking about any of these issues. So I mean that was always kind of interesting. I mean my only experience was in India, and that was certainly very different in terms of what was and wasn't dangerous to talk about, or like what did and didn't feel, you know, comfortable to talk about. And then getting anybody there on time in India is tricky. But I'm trying to think about some of the skits we did in India. Well, I was primarily working with like immediate post-high school students, like college freshmen, but it was during their summer break.
Were there references you didn't get at all, or
Things that you didn't do in India, like ones that you definitely went
Well, it was definitely a lighter level of discussion because A, because we were there for a short, you know, only 5 weeks. B, because they didn't have any background in this. C, because we were performing for friends and family in a very culturally conservative, you know, environment. So there was a limit on what was safe to say anyways, and particularly on what was safe to identify, like as belonging to members of this group. I mean, just remember like little things like, what was the phrase I'd never heard before, Eve teasing, which is like, there's probably a more culturally specific meaning for it, but it's like harassment, but not, probably more like catcalling, like at that level of interaction, and it's referred to as Eve teasing, which I think is a funny name, but, so I remember there was a whole skit about Eve teasing, I was like, well, whatever, if you say that's, you know, then do it, you know. But it was definitely, that was an interesting experience of taking the wall work and the IMWR work, which is theoretically adaptable to any situation, and then trying to say, I don't know what your situation is. Whereas in IMWR, even though there are people whose backgrounds we don't understand, we're all coming again to some kind of common community, some kind of common core. Facilitating from the outside is a very different experience. And when I don't have enough experience, then I'd like to do more of it, but it's a bizarre kind of, I don't know. Hi, how are you? Good.
Okay, I have questions about social justice theater in high school. Did you mention that you guys went to a high school and did some workshops? Or
We didn't
something?
actively work inside a high school
Okay.
because that would have got tricky real fast. We did summer workshops with high school kids
Oh, okay.
in my barn and a couple other places.
And, I mean, do you think social justice theater can happen in high schools?
Yes. Partly because, like, as any of you who've been in IMWR for like 2 or 3 years recognize, there's a way in which the younger members of IMWR are often the people coming in with the issue, with the substance, and it's the older members of IMWR who have in some ways like spent that part of themselves doing IMWR that have that are there developing process and product, right, and are there to shepherd and to facilitate. So with high school students, it's like one step even further back, right? These are people who are in the very midst of dealing for the first time with whatever issue affects them from a social justice, range of issues. So that being said, now, I was working, both times I did work with high school students, I was working with primarily like kids who already identified as theater kids. So there was a level of openness that already existed. I think it would be very different if I were to take the wrestling team and do social justice theater, and I see where that would go. But it actually, Chris Bacon and Lindsay Fox and I led those 2 summers, and quickly realized that that is actually a much more dangerous place to work in to protect the kids. We left several nights thinking we had probably done more harm than we had done good in like ripping open the deepest, darkest secrets of your life, which is what I Am We Are does, but at a point in their lives where they weren't able to do that in a healthy way. I mean, if we ever are. So I think the I Am We Are model needs adapting to move into the high school realm, but it can be done.
Because I would like to bring it to my high school. Like, I think it's something, I don't know, like, again, I had never heard of social justice theater until I got here, and that's not a thing in Mexico, or at least I don't think it is. I mean, right now with the government, things are really bad, and I've been seeing that they've been doing stuff. I don't know if it's social justice theater, but I know that they've been doing stuff with theater, but it's not that out there. Like, I've only seen so few pictures on Facebook of like people in Mexico City doing stuff. But I mean, I would love to see it happen at my high school. Like, either I come back and tell my like people like, oh, there's an idea here that you guys should maybe do, and cause yeah, like my high school has become such like a hostile place from bullying and kids who, sorry for the lack of a better phrase, but kids who are rich bitches because it's one of the
I'm getting a
prestigious
t-shirt.
schools. It's just horrible, and I hate to see that the school has become that, because I've been there since I was in 4th grade. So I've seen like how it's changed since, it's just so bad now. And now that I'm out of there, like I just feel bad for the kids who are there, because it's like, yeah, you guys were not there in the good years.
There are schools that do. I mean, there was one year I was at, PTO Open the Cities.
Oh.
There was like a high school group.
Yeah.
I mean, it was part of their curriculum. It was not at the level of, what I Am We Are does in terms of the depth of the issues.
There's
But
some
there
high
are
school
some
groups, yeah.
who do it programmatically within the school.
Or, Judith.
I had a question. So going off of what Giselle said, bringing this to high schools, one thing that I see, and I'm just curious about, since you kind of touched upon it, I mean, it's not that people come to college and are suddenly affected by social justice
Right.
issues. Everybody has been affected by them before college.
Right.
So it's not necessarily a question of can you do this with high schoolers for me, because obviously the issues are there.
Right.
But I feel the difference in the college settings, for example, here, having counseling available. Do you think that, because bringing this to a high school for me would more be the issue of what's happening with the kid after they leave class,
Exactly.
after I open this like can of whatever is inside of them,
Yes.
and where can they go? And do you think if we brought this to high schools, we would have to make sure to like work with counseling or get like a counselor? Do you think it's safe to bring this to a place without having counseling available?
That's definitely what we've felt the summers we were with high school kids, that we didn't have like the experience or the training as psychologists or as counselors to deal with what we were unwrapping, and that we were sending kids away, like you said, opening the can of worms and saying, well, see you tomorrow night, and that's not safe or healthy for them. And as you mentioned earlier, the difference, between high school kids and college kids is that the high school kids are usually living in the same source of whatever problem that they're addressing, right?
Yeah.
So they literally don't have a safe place to go to. Again, that's part of where the method needs to be adapted for younger kids, and where maybe there isn't a healthy way, except in some pretty specific settings, like a boarding school, or like, there may not be healthy settings for doing the depth of that work at the high school level. I just don't know.
But you could get it started
At a
yeah,
service
less
level, but it's a
personal,
less
yeah.
personal. And there are certainly ways to talk about bullying, to talk about, gender, to talk about sexuality in a way that isn't quite as like heave up my
Yeah,
heart
yeah, yeah.
that I Am We Are does. So,
So you'd recommend to like more stay at a surface level and just like touch upon the issues and just hope they go off to a college where they can like go.
I would
go
say
and-
that I Am We Are's model is about taking the individual experience, thoroughly parsing that, and then extrapolating it out to the larger community. And that model, while being the Walls model, is also the most dangerous for that high school group who doesn't have the capacity or the resources to deal with their own issue. And so by starting about the larger issue about bullying, that gives them the option to open up about their own experience, but doesn't require that the depth of the work beyond like, okay, now we're gonna do a forum piece based on your experience of rape. That's a lot for a 16-year-old kid, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that it has to be modified.
I was just gonna say to kind of build off what she was asking, in terms of taking it to high school. I think practicality is probably, like you said, starting off at a surface level. I don't think, obviously, everyone's not gonna go to college.
Right.
Yeah.
Quite a few people, the majority aren't gonna go to college. But I think where we are now when it comes to technology, and especially the world obviously hasn't necessarily progressed in any way, but like things are being put out there more, so they are being be put in the spotlight. We of course wish that more would be put in the spotlight, but I think as time goes on, and whenever we do get to this idealistic place of how to approach younger audience and getting them in the circle of social justice and equality and equity and stuff like that, I just think the use of these things to further push the envelope, like you said, start off going to high schools, doing little small workshops on bullying, race, sexuality, gender, stuff like that. But like where we are in college and the platform we have, that we do pour out our hearts to further put stuff on this and then talk to the people above us to get shit passed and all that. So I think, like I said, practicality and like the kind of hierarchy of social justice, I guess, that there is.
I think that's an interesting idea, like how do you adapt what I Am We Are does for a place where an ensemble doesn't exist, like where there's no place to form an ensemble. And for most kids who have a phone, this is like their one private bit of like way to reach the outside world, right? And so in some ways, you're right, like for kids in a hostile environment, how do you do I Am We Are by cell phone? I don't know what that is, but
Yeah,
there's some
for sure.
interesting.
Although, yeah.
Yeah, I have cousins who are 7 and have iPhones, so like they're starting off young.
And unfortunately, the bullying also can reach them by phone.
Right, yeah.
So.
Double-edged sword.
I just think like it like I said, it's all like practicality can work both negatively and positively. Like it was practical to like, because the only way you want to reach somebody back before technology was in their face. Like, so now that we have this, it's practical to do it here. Like, and it's just as effective, it's just in a different way of using it. So I think, like, there's a double-edged sword to everything. I don't think there's any, except for Care Bear. I don't know, I don't know. That's the only pure thing I think of. But I mean, like, it's just, like, I see what you're saying, and I thoroughly agree. I just think, like, I don't think that can, like, stop it from being effective,
And the other end of, like, the question about does it work in high schools is something I didn't think about when we were doing it, but now, like, I would find it much more difficult to go back and, like, restart that work with high school students. So now I'm 28. When I was 21, working with 18-year-olds, that didn't really bother adults. But right now I work with kids all summer from age 6. If I'm gonna get a group of kids together and talk about sexuality, that's gonna be a really big problem for my community, right? So how do finding the way to make the transition is difficult because outside of this college experience where everybody's on the same level, then you have to have a facilitator who's older, who's an adult, working with, at some level, a group of minors. That puts a lot of restrictions, A, on what any group of adults is gonna let you do, and B, what you can realistically do, and maintain some degree of like legal safety over that, right? So it gets vastly more complicated outside of the college setting, in whatever form. Did you have your hands up?
Yeah, like I was just going off of it. That's why I asked you the question about like different perspectives and different houses, because like I went to the rape culture, November's thing, and like they student stuff like they consider as rape, and like where I come from, like it's like they student stuff like because it's a cultural thing, like we don't look at it as as a big deal, like if it's a rape or something. So that's why I was kind of asking that question, like, oh,
Sure.
if it's like you have a trouble like dealing with like certain people and they don't think it's a big deal, they don't take you serious or something like
Right.
that, like even though you brought up it's a social justice issue and just like.
I know, I remember Julian Bawal talking about that a little bit at the PTO conference in Minneapolis. Julian Augusto's son travels internationally and teaches in workshops. And he goes, obviously he goes everywhere. I mean, he's all over the world doing that. And it was interesting kind of hearing some of those experiences of like, where they'll be dealing with one social justice issue, which was important to that group of people. But at the meantime, I've been out of academia long enough. The intersection of social justice issues, right? So he'll be dealing with one issue that they're trying to solve. At the meantime, this other issue is happening that they're perpetrating. So like, how do you deal with that? I don't have any experience in that, but it's certainly a problem in the work with any. Again, anytime you're the outsider working with another group, you recognize things that are not recognized, or you see things in a different way. I was just remembering, just popped out of nowhere, another skit that we hadn't talked about, which was we did a swastika skit with candles on the stage of.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
I don't remember. It was a night of shattered glass text, something like that. Have we done that? It's been done since then.
Well, the way the sort of Helen Keller piece has started in the past is to recount, incidents of,
Right.
bias, violence. And so the swastika having been stamped into the snow, which happened one year, and as a result, there was a teach-in about anti-Semitism, that the faculty organized very quickly after that happened. That used to be named in the show for many,
Right.
years afterward, and has it recently been,
It's still
there, because it's pretty graphic,
Yeah, it's the first one mentioned. It's like it's done in the form of like a newscaster. Really,
Yeah.
someone comes on and it's like,
Right.
this did happen. This is a definition of a bias incident, and this event happened, and then it also so that one starts the order, and then it goes in order up to the most recent event of hate and bias.
And we don't name everything that's ever happened, right?
No, it's like this happened, this happened, this happened. This happened.
The main events that we get emails about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it's still the case here, but I remember in college that like a swastika got drawn or stamped into something with some regularity, and like that was just always part of the show because it happened, a couple times a year. Is that still the case?
You see them, it's a little more directly race.
We thought of them as like vaguely normal hate, it was just like a constant in the background.
People do it, without even really knowing what it means, just knowing that it's a negative thing to do and not even necessarily knowing.
Just look at that and good luck, John.
Well, thank you, Evan, for.
Thank you.